So we are in part 8 of this series, studying contrasts, and this is looking at two different characters, as you remember well, King Saul and King David, and we are looking at one story in 1 Samuel chapter 25 that I could not go over without bringing it to us today. There's just a lot of good stuff in the story, and so we're going to look at that today. I would ask for a show of hands, but the truth is I already know the answer. All of us have experienced loss. And we may not think about it, but the truth of the matter is all of us in this room today, and anyone who is watching on TV, we have all experienced loss. It may be the loss of mobility. It may be the loss of a relationship that was very meaningful to us, but has been broken in some way. It could be the loss of some kind of a limb or the ability to do something that you so enjoyed and was really a kind of a spiritual experience for you. It could be the loss of a loved one. Loss comes in many different forms, but when it comes, it brings with it usually some very strong emotions. And we feel those kinds of things inside, and what it does is it ends up making us more vulnerable to the circumstances around us. And so what we're going to look at today is a story that begins in this place. And then we're going to look at some of the manifestations of how this played out in an individual's life and how they made decisions based on this that were not healthy for them, but fortunately someone came along and helped them get back in the right space. So let's take a look at this. Our context is the verse that was read for us at the very beginning today, 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verse 1. And the very important part of that verse is 3 words. Then Samuel died. This is the very first 3 words of chapter 25 of 1 Samuel. And we realize that people die all the time. It is an extremely sad and brutal fact of life in this world as we know it. And people died in the days of the Old Testament, in the days of King David and King Saul. They died frequently. But there were few people who died that the entire nation mourned. Samuel is one of those people. Samuel was the prophet and the judge of the nation. He was the kind of person that held things together within the nation in a spiritual and moral capacity. Because at this point in time, there was not a lot of that going around from the leadership. And so people looked to Samuel kind of still as their due north, their north point, if you will, for God and for morality. And he was like the glue that just kept everything together. And so when the text says that Samuel died, this creates a huge vacuum within the nation. This is just not like the person down the street passing away, as sad as that is. This is the person that represents God to the nation dying. And it carries with it a tremendous amount of weight and an extreme experience of loss. Because who is going to take his place? And guess who suffers? David. This means that David's support person is gone. The person who calls David to be the next king of the nation and anoints him when he's a teenager. The person to whom David runs when he is hunted by Saul. The person that he looks to for moral direction and for spiritual guidance is gone. And he's not coming back. And you can imagine David probably doesn't even get to go to the funeral because of the relationship that's there happening with Saul. And so David feels a sense of loss. And with that comes the experience of grief. It comes with it the experience of sadness, deep emotional pain. The things that you experience, that I experience when there is a significant loss in our lives. David's a human being, and so David feels. Sometimes loss can put us on edge, and it can make us more reactive than responsive. Have you ever noticed that? When you're dealing with something really heavy and weighted, oftentimes we have a tendency to react versus respond. And sometimes that also produces a sense of despair and loss of hope. And when Samuel was the epitome of hope for a nation, when he's gone, guess what people feel? So with all of that, the text tells us that David and his men go to Maon, and this is a kind of a wilderness area. He has a slight reprieve from Saul's attacks, and this is a story that does not put David in a good light. We like to think of David as the man after God's own heart, but the reality is David had moments, and this is one of those moments that we're going to see. All right, so the story, chapter 25, and we're just going to touch on a couple of things because we really want to get to the heart of this story. One of the characters at the beginning of this story, his name is Nabal, as we often pronounce it in English. Nabal is actually more of the appropriate way to pronounce his name. So Nabal, his name means fool. How many of you would like that name? No takers. Thank you. We don't want that. That's what his name means, actually. I don't know how he got it. I think he came by it naturally. Text tells us he was rich, very wealthy, 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, so he had a lot of stock for his day. He was also extremely harsh, and the text says that he was mean in his dealings. In some of your translations, you'll read the word evil in his dealings. That's Nabal. Now, Abigail, his wife, she is wise, the antithesis of Nabal, her husband. She is beautiful. She is also wealthy because she's attached to him. She's the antithesis in character of everything that Nabal stands for. So we have night and day married together. And then David makes a request. So here's kind of the backstory to this. There is a festival that's going on. Nabal and his crew are shearing all of those sheep. 3,000 sheep to shear. That's going to take quite a while to do. So they're up in Carmel shearing sheep, and this is a special time because when you get done with all that, you get to take it to market and spin and do whatever is done with wool, and you're fairly wealthy in that experience. And so everybody's going to celebrate. The sheep shearers are there, and this is going to be a time of celebration and feasting. And so David has been, with his 600 men, they have been in the area where Nabal and his shepherds have been keeping their sheep, pasturing their sheep. And he and his men have been a protection for them for quite some time, for months probably. And nothing has gone missing. All of the shepherds have been protected. David and his men have not stolen anything. Imagine trying to feed 600 people out in the wilderness. There might be kind of a temptation to start purloining things and somehow justifying it. But David and his men don't do this, and Nabal's shepherds know it. So David comes with all of this. He sends 10 of his men to this special time, this special moment in time to Nabal, and they ask in the most respectful way possible, hey, could you give us just a little gift as a way of saying thank you for everything that we've done for you? We're not asking for anything big, just whatever you find in your hand to give as just a little way of saying thank you. Now, for most of us, we would say, oh, of course. We'd be happy to. You've helped us so much. We'll be happy to give you something. And that's what they're expecting. Listen to his response. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to the men coming from who knows where?" How many of you think that was a really nice response? Yeah. Here's what we hear in this: disdain, ridicule, contempt, scorn. Who does David even think he is? I don't even know him. He's just another runaway servant, because everybody knows the story of David and Saul. And he gives nothing. And so David's men, they turn on their heels and go back to David empty-handed, and they share the news with David. Now, David, when he hears the news, how do you think he felt? Oh, don't worry about it. It's okay. He's just having a bad day. Was that an option? Yes, it was. But the season of life that David is in kind of puts him on edge. And David becomes more reactive than responsive. The story carries on. How do you think you would react? And let me give you an illustration. You have been mowing the yard of a senior member of your neighborhood because they physically can't do it. You've been doing this the entire summer, taking care of their yard for them, never needing to be asked, doing it because it's the right thing to do and you're happy to help. And so one day while you're baking something, you realize you are a half a cup of flour short. Just a half a cup. And so you run next door because this is in motion and you don't have time to run to the store. This needs to happen quickly. And so you run next door and you knock on the door of this person that you have been assisting all summer long without expecting anything in return. And you ask, "I am so sorry to bother you. Can I just have a half a cup of flour? And I don't even care what kind it is. Just a half a cup." And they say to you, "Who do you think you are asking me for flour? I am not about to help you. I don't know you. I don't even like you. Get off of my porch." And they slam the door in your face. How do you feel? Can you feel it inside right now? You want to rip the screen door off of their house, right? Many of us would want to do that, probably. We have choices to make. We don't have to respond this way. But imagine that some things have been going really wrong in your life, and you've been experiencing some serious loss and grief, and then something like this happens, a complete slap in your face. So here's how David responded. David said to his men, when he hears the news, "Each of you strap on your sword." And so they did, the text says. And David strapped his on as well. About 400 men went up with David. They are going from the wilderness where they are up to Carmel. David is out for blood. That's the only reason you strap a sword on, is because you plan to use it. Listen to what he says next. He says, "It has been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good." That doesn't feel good, does it, when someone pays you back evil for the good you've done? David goes on, and listen to this. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. Exemplary man after God's own heart, isn't it? David is not going to simply do an eye for an eye and go back down there and share some words with Nabal and tell him how he feels. David wants to burn the house down with everyone in it. He wants to wipe out the entire family because he was disrespected and slapped in the face verbally. Have you ever noticed that there are times in our lives where the offense that was done to us, we have this desire, this response of wanting to go far beyond in retribution and vengeance? This is not even. This is, I'm going to take a huge step beyond that when I get back at this person. That's the fallen part of humanity. And then you throw all these other emotions into the mix, and we are sitting ducks. What David is feeling is one thing, but what David chooses to do with those feelings is completely out of line. David can't see beyond this very moment. He can't see beyond the anger that he feels inside right then. He can't see what the results of actually going through with this are going to mean for his future. And for all of those innocent people who had nothing to do with this offense, but who would suffer simply because they are in some way connected. He can't see beyond it. And haven't you discovered in life that that's often how it happens with us? In these moments, we don't think down the road. We can only think about right here, right now. We don't think about the consequences for ourselves and for other people. Fortunately, Abigail comes on the scene. That wise, beautiful woman. Abigail gets a whisper in her ear from one of the servants who's watched David's men walk away frustrated. And they say to her, Abigail, this is what just happened. This is what your husband just did. And we're really worried about this. We have a bad feeling that something really bad's going to happen. You might want to take this seriously and do something about it. Because nobody can talk to him about it. You might want to do something. And Abigail's the kind of person who doesn't just sit down and say, give me a day to think about that. There's no time. Listen to the text. Verse 18. Abigail acted how? Quickly. She assessed the situation in a matter of minutes, and she is on the move immediately. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, clean out the grocery store, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain. That probably doesn't mean anything to most of us. Just figure 60 pounds about of roasted grain. That's a lot of grain. 100 cakes of raisins and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. She's on it quickly. David came and his men came, and they asked for a little gift. Well, I'm going to give them a serious gift because I know what's coming. And so she does this, verse 19. She then told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. It's pointless to tell him anything because he would have said, no, don't do it. I'm not going to give him anything. She doesn't even ask him. Smart move on that particular moment. We actually see this type of a scenario happen in the story of Jacob and Esau. when Esau is coming to meet Jacob, and Jacob sends these gifts on ahead of him, and then he sends his family, and then finally Jacob shows up. Same kind of a situation here. She sends this on in advance of her. So here we have David, hot with rage and vengeance, going way beyond the offense that was done to him. And then we have Abigail coming, trying to put out the fire. And then they meet. Verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey, and listen to this, and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. This is a wealthy, high-status woman of society, bowing down before David. In the wilderness, this guy was 600 men. She bows down before him. She fell at his feet, verse 24, and said, "Pardon your servant, my Lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Just give me a moment, please. There's something I need to share with you. Please pay no attention, my Lord, to that wicked man, Nabal." Let's just put him out of the picture for a moment, okay? He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. That's who he is. We all know it. That's just the reality. So let's put him off to the side over there, because he's just a foolish man. And as for me, listen to the words that she uses. As for me, your servant, I did not see the men my Lord sent. She is lowering herself to the status of a servant and elevating David to the status of a leader. My Lord. And yet this woman, because of the way society would work, she's wealthy, she has status, and yet she is humbling herself before him. I didn't see what was going on. I didn't know about this. Verse 26, and now, my Lord, listen to what she does. This is amazing. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands. Where's David headed? To Nabal's home. And what's he planning to do? Shed blood with his own hand. He's just been paused for a moment, but he still has this in mind. And notice how she addresses it. As if it was already in the past and he didn't do it. She's speaking into David's reality. This isn't something that you have to do. Actually, this isn't something that you're even going to do, is it? Because you fear God. And God has kept you from doing this thing. She speaks almost prophetically into his life, calling him to pause. And then she says, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord, be like Nabal. It's almost as if she knows something that's going to happen later on in the story. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my Lord, be given to the men who follow you. You wanted a gift, here it is. Everything that you wanted and more, and it's right here. Happy to give it to you. You don't need to go through with this. And then she says, verse 28, please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you. David, don't forget who you are. Don't forget who called you. Don't forget the position that God is bringing you towards. Wrongdoing? That's not your style, David. That's not the style that God wants for you. Yet a man has arisen to pursue you and seek your life, but the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God. It's the idea basically of like a purse. You stick something really valuable in it, a leather pouch, and then you wrap it up securely so that nothing falls out. She's basically saying, this is what God's doing with you, David. He's stuck you in his pouch and he's wrapped you up and you are safe there. You don't need to do this. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the pocket of a sling, kind of taking David back to his teenage years with that story of Goliath and how God intervened when David was trusting him. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord has done for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you ruler over Israel. This is what's coming, David. It's coming. God's going to do this. That this will be no grief to you, nor offense of heart to my Lord, either that you have shed blood without cause, or that my Lord has avenged himself. You know what Abigail just did? She de-escalated the situation. But what she did is she shined light into the darkness of David's soul. Because there was some darkness going on in there, brought on by all these other things that were going on in David's life. And David is reactive. And she shines a spotlight in there as if to say, David, do you see this? This isn't you. This isn't the man that God chose to be the next king of the nation. And then she shines a spotlight on his future in the light of what he was considering doing, as if to say, David, I want you to look ahead. I don't want you to have regret and to carry this around with you for the rest of your life, because it's going to be a heavy thing if you go through with this. I want you to be able to see ahead, and I want you to be able to tell a different story than the one you were going to have to tell. And David listened to a woman. He knew that God had spoken through her. Then David said to Abigail, Blessed is the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand. God is in this. He sent you, and he just saved me through you. And I am so grateful that you shine some light in there and you helped me to get perspective and enabled me to pause for a minute so that I could begin to process what in the world was going on in me. So David received from her hand what she had brought him and said to her, Go up in peace to your house. See, I have heeded your voice and respected your person. You can go back safely, because I'm not going to do what I was thinking to do. And you can take my word for it. I will not do this, because God sent you to stop me. David sees clearly finally, because someone was willing to step in and shine a little bit of light and give David space to begin processing what was going on. And David was able to take a step back. And we have done this. We've taken a step back and almost shuddered at the reality of what we were about to do before God sent someone to help us not cross that line. And then we can see clearly. All right, let's think of just a couple of conclusions as we wrap up. From the perspective of David, when we're in these kind of moments, let's recognize the seasons that we're in. When we're dealing with some really serious stuff, let's recognize that we are. and realize that we're going to need a little bit more space, a little bit more margin than normal because of what's going on inside of us and all of those emotions that we're dealing with. And then let's begin to recognize the types of feelings that are going on inside. If we are starting to get angry, let's actually say that to ourselves, because when we voice something to ourselves, it gives us a chance to be able to say, what do I want to actually do with this thing? Instead of just totally being driven by it, we can actually stop for a moment and say, what do I want to do with this? So let's recognize what's happening inside of us. And then let's pause before reacting in ways that we can't take back. Because once those words are said and once that action is done, it can't be put back. It's done. And there are consequences. And sometimes we just need to walk away. We just need to walk away because it's not safe to be in that space for ourselves or for the other person. And this is not put last because it's not important, but man, God help me. Send up a prayer. God help me, because right now the water's boiling and I need you to help me be able to walk away so that this can come back down and you can bring me back to a place where I can see clearly again. And pray that God will place an Abigail in your life, someone that's able to speak truth in a way that you can actually receive and helps you take that pause, that helps you do what you actually want to do as God's child. And let's recognize that a lot of us are dealing with stuff. There's very few of us that get through life unscathed. Most of us are dealing with something at any given moment. And sometimes because of that, the reactions that we have may not always be quite in line with how we want to represent God. Let's realize this. And then let's extend some grace to each other, recognizing that we're all dealing with something. And then when we realize that we've overreacted, when we've said things we shouldn't have said, or we've done things we shouldn't have done that hurt other people, and God gives us the space to actually realize that, let's own it. And then let's apologize and be honest about it. That's what family does. And finally, from Abigail's perspective, let's ask God to form within us a spirit like Abigail's, so that we can be the kind of person who can help other people from crossing lines that they're going to regret for the rest of their lives. And just imagine if each of us was that kind of person to someone else, how much God could do in the lives of other people because there's someone there that helps hold them back, that helps them find clarity, that gives them a moment of pause and saves them from doing something that they're going to regret for the rest of their lives. And who is able to see that what's actually happening is not just them, but it's happening because of all this other stuff that's going on inside of them, and can help them begin to process that. Let's be Abigails in this world